From 750 AD to 1258 AD, the Abbasid Caliphate controlled a large empire that looked something like this. After defeating the Umayyads in war, they set up a capital in present-day Baghdad, Iraq. They established a large bureaucracy to control all of the different parts of the Middle East that they owned. Most of the money to run the government came from taxes. They taxed land, trade, and travel. The Abbasid government tried very hard to interact with local religious leaders and hoped to convert more people to Sunni Muslim and show more patriotism for the caliphate. Unfortunately, this attempt was not very successful, and many smaller caliphates started forming in the later stages of the empire. Since the Abbasids controlled basically all of the Middle East, they controlled each of the trade routes in between Eastern Asia and the Mediterranean. They established one language in their empire and one currency, the dinar, to make it much easier for trade and encourage it more between the two different places. They also established a very modern checking system using the dinar, where a traveler could input their money in a bank in Far East Asia, in exchange take out a check, basically a carved out tablet that said how much money they were owed, and then when they reached the other end of the empire they could withdraw the money from a different bank and carry on their way. This was extremely beneficial because they didn't have to carry their money with them all the time, they didn't have to risk being stolen, and the empire could charge taxes or interest on it. The time during the Abbasid rule was known as the Muslim Golden Age. There was a large variety of culture throughout the empire, and Baghdad was considered the culture center of the world. It was a place where people from all over the world would come to translate the world's knowledge into Arabic. This was extremely important because there were many things in culture back then that would have been lost if it weren't translated and recorded and stored in the House of Wisdom, where we can now look at it today. In 1258 AD, the Abbasid culture and empire came to an end. It had been growing weak for some time now, with many of the edges in lesser parts of the empire breaking off or creating their own caliphates. But then, in 1258, as I said, the Mongols destroyed Baghdad, officially ending the Abbasid Caliphate for good. Famously regarded as the first advanced civilization in history, the land between two rivers, also known as Sumer, was a collection of city-states that started forming around 3000 BC. The civilization had three main disadvantages. One, the rivers were unpredictable. They either flowed too much and flooded, or dried up, causing a drought. They also had no natural land barriers, meaning they could be attacked at any time from anywhere. And lastly, they had very little resources, like wood or metals. Since they're an advanced society, one of the key components is specialized worker. A specialized worker is someone who does one single job in return for money or goods. For example, a baker. You can pay him money to bake your food, so you don't have to spend all that time baking it yourself. You can use the time to do other things, such as invent or innovate. The Sumerians are famous for what specialized workers do is also boost the economy. Sumer was very famous for its marketplaces. They didn't have a formal currency set up, so they used a bartering system, traded goods for goods and services. In the beginning, each one was ruled by a priest, because the people of Sumer believed that their crop yield and production was heavily based on the blessings of the gods. So they had the priests pray for them and hope for a better crop season and for good fortune. However, during times of war, the armies of the Sumerian city-states would elect a leader, one of their best fighters, to command them in war. Eventually, war between the city-states became so frequent that the war leaders ended up just becoming the kings of each individual city-state. Sumerian religion is much like Greek or Roman mythology. They were polytheistic with one main, most powerful god, Enlil. The humans believed they were subjects to the god and that their purpose was to provide amusement and sacrifice. In each Sumerian city there was this thing known as a ziggurat. A ziggurat was basically what we see in Egypt with a pyramid, but it was tiered, so there was individual steps. At the top, priests would pray to the gods there and make their sacrifices. Stored inside the ziggurats were crops, food, water, anything that they want to keep stored that was supposed to be meant for the gods. Some ziggurats reached over 300 feet tall, as we can see in Babylon, which I'll talk about later. The Sumerian daily life was much like other ancient civilizations. They had social caste system with the richest on the top and the slaves and the poorest people on the bottom. They also interact with each other in marketplaces and bazaars. Most of the information we have about the Sumerians was based off their writing system, which was known as cuneiform. They used clay tablets and they'd take stone tools to carve out their writing, which was mainly pictographs. It preserved in the clay once it hardened, and that's how we have most of it still left today. Eventually, around 2000 BC, the Sumerian city-states fall. Because this is mainly due to a large amount of internal fighting, weakening all the city-states, and in the end, the Akkadians came and completely wiped them out, taking over all of Mesopotamia and the Fertile Crescent. Next, I'll talk about the Safavids. They rose around the 16th century and were immediately controlled by a king named Abbas the Great. At their peak, their territory consisted of most of what's modern-day Iraq and Iran, as you can see here. Abbas created a lot of reform in the empire. 3 things he was famous for was 1, splitting the army into 2, one to fight with, and the other portion was a personal army because he didn't feel safe with the people around him and he wanted protection. The second thing he was famous for was the punishment against corruption. He was severely strict on corruption, and anyone who tried it would often receive the death penalty. And last, what he was also famous for was his inclusion of other cultures. He personally invited a group of Christians to come live in the civilization to show the rest of the world that he was extremely welcoming. This created a lot of cultural bleeding and brought much more culture for his empire. Going back around 70 years before Abbas the Great, there was a 12-year-old king that rose to power. His name was Ismail. He was extremely cruel to all of his people, and anyone who didn't convert to his preferred religion, Shiism, would often be punished and killed. Going on many military tirades, Ismail tried to attack the Ottomans. He failed badly and withdrew to what is now the present-day border of Iraq and Iran. One of the most famous cities in Safavid history, most famous for their culture, was known as Esfahan, a city that still stands in modern Iran today. They had a huge amount of culture. People from all around the world came to make pottery and carpets and a lot of silverware, just like this mug here. But in the end, everyone meets their downfall. And for the Safavids, it was the Ottomans. They took over their culture and ended them around the 18th century. Chaldean Babylon was located in the Fertile Crescent, the same area as the ancient Sumerians. This meant that they had all the same advantages and disadvantages the people there before them. They relied heavily on the Euphrates River because Babylon was not near the ocean, and they needed a source of water to keep the civilization alive. They were led by a king named Nebuchadnezzar, and he changed many things. He restored the Hanging Gardens, he built a great military, and created a wall around the city that's very famous. Also well known is the 300-foot ziggurat in the middle of the city where they prayed to the gods and started a basis of astronomy that would carry on for several thousand more years.
The Persian Empire was based on obedience, diplomacy, and a strong military. It stretched from Central Europe and southern Russia to the Fertile Crescent. Persia had many resources. Ancient Iran had gold, silver, copper. Cyrus proved that if you are tolerable to your subordinates, then they will be more loyal to you than if you are cruel to them. Cyrus's son, Cambyses, expanded the empire after his father's death, but was cruel to his subjects, resulting in a revolt after his death. After Cambyses' death, Darius, one of his former bodyguards, gained power and went on to conquer many more places, expanding the empire by 500 miles. Darius was not successful in taking Greece, but that was his only failure. To better control the empire, Darius split the empire into 20 provinces. The Seljuks were one of the first Turkish groups to move into the Abbasid Empire. In 1055 BC, they attacked and captured Baghdad from the Persians, and nearly 20 years later, the Seljuk Sultans marched on the Byzantine Empire. Malik Shah ruled as the last of the strong Seljuk leaders. After his unexpected death in 1092 BC, no capable Shah appeared to replace him, so the Seljuk Empire quickly disintegrated into a loose collection of minor kingdoms. Pope Urban II launched the First Crusade in 1095 BC. He called on Christians to drive the Turks out of Anatolia and recover Jerusalem from Muslim rule. In 1099 BC, the Crusaders captured Jerusalem and massacred its Jewish and Muslim inhabitants. They established a Latin Christian kingdom that lasted about a century. Eventually, a fragment of the former Seljuk Empire gathered enough strength to fight back, under their famous Kurdish captain Saladin. Under Captain Saladin, the Muslims recovered Jerusalem in 1187. After the governor of Syria, Ali, died in 661 BC, the Umayyads came to power. They moved the Muslim capital to Damascus, and this location away from Mecca made controlling conquered territories easier. However, the Arab Muslims felt it was too far away from their lands. In addition, the Umayyads abandoned the simple life of previous caliphs and began to surround themselves with wealth. These actions, along with leadership issues, gave rise to a fundamental division in the Muslim community. The Sunni and Shia split in the interest of peace. The majority of Muslims accepted the Umayyads' rule. However, a minority continued to resist this group and developed an alternate view of the office of caliph. The Shia believed that the caliph needed to be a descendant of the Prophet, Ali. The other group became known as the Sunni, meaning the followers of Muhammad's example. Vigorous religious and political opposition to the Umayyad Caliphate led to its downfall. Rebel groups overthrew the Umayyads in the year 750 BC.
Babylon was founded in 2300 BC. They were ruled by Hammurabi. Hammurabi created a law known as Hammurabi's Code, which consisted of 282 laws. These laws were known to be very harsh. The empire reached its peak during the reign of Hammurabi. Babylon's decline was around 2000 BC. They were invaded by a group of warriors known as the Amorites. This video represents one of Hammurabi's code of laws. For example, Keanu pokes Colin's eye out. By law, Keanu would have to get his eye poked out. Assyria was known for being very powerful. From 1360 BC to 1074 BC, Assyria conquered all of Mesopotamia. Assyria's last rise was the strongest. From 744 to 612 BC, Assyria controlled most of the Middle East and Egypt. This video represents Assyria's major decline in 612 BC. They were taken down by Babylonia. The Hittites were known for trading with their neighboring lands. They traded items such as silver, iron, and copper. The Hittites were well known for working with chariots. Even though the Hittites did not invent the chariot, they were successful for improving the original chariot design. This video represents the Hittites' decline. They were invaded by a group of people known as the Sea.
The Ottoman Empire started in 1299, but as a weaker civilization. They were constantly under the threat of the Byzantine Empire, who descended from the Romans, until 1453, when they did the siege of Constantinople and took over the Byzantine Empire, completely destroying it. They were ruled under an absolute monarchy by a ruler called the Sultan. The Sultan was kind of like an emperor or a king. The most famous Sultan, however, was probably Mehmed II, who staged the siege of Constantinople in 1453. During their time as an empire, they had many enemies, but their most fearsome and powerful enemy was probably the Russian Empire, who they had many scuffles and wars against. Often they were defeated, but they have beaten the Russians before, especially in their biggest war, World War I. They lasted 600 years until 1923 after World War I, when the last Sultan died, and they turned into the Republic of Turkey. The empire formed in 1206 when the iconic conqueror Genghis Khan led his hordes and took over Eurasia. The Mongol Empire was the largest empire ever seen by humanity, which stretched all the way from Korea all the way to eastern Germany. The toughest invasion, though, for the Mongols was most likely the invasion of the Kievan Rus, which is ancient Russia. It sort of went like this. When they took over the Kievan Rus, they were already split into hordes. The horde that took over the Kievan Rus was the Golden Horde, which was the most iconic and famous of the Mongol hordes. The Mongol Empire began to crumble, however, when Ivan the Terrible of Russia kicked out the Tatars, or the Golden Horde, from his land. Then, when they were retreated back to Eastern Asia, China, in the Yuan dynasty, sent them all the way back into native Mongolia. The Mongol Empire still has its legacy, with many statues of Genghis Khan throughout the native Mongolian country. The impact that the Mongols had on Western Asia, though, was that they killed the last caliph of the Seljuks. Alexander the Great was born in the Kingdom of Macedonia in 356 BC, during the reign of his father, Philip. Only 20 years old, he succeeded his father Philip after Philip was murdered. He would then go on to conquer all of Greece, all of Macedonia, Turkey, the Middle East, and would take almost all of Southwest Asia, and all the way almost into India. At the empire's greatest extent, it extended all the way from Macedonia all the way to India. Even though it wasn't all of India conquered, he had a part of it already. His empire was one of the biggest ever seen by humanity, and had many different climates, which would always affect how he ruled. Most of Alexander's empire was a dry desert, due to its location in the Middle East. And Alexander's empire also consisted of the Balkan Peninsula, which is a Mediterranean. If you don't know what a Mediterranean climate is, that sort of means that it is very warm in the summer, like Los Angeles. But in the winter, the weather is more like Boston. And he first conquered Greece. After he conquered Greece, he set his sights on the Empire of Persia, which had been a long rival of Greece. He conquered the Hellespont, and then moved up to the city of Gordium in the north, which is located in modern-day Turkey, near the capital. He was to unravel the Gordian knot, which was a knot that was basically impossible to unravel, and it is said that he who unravels the knot will conquer all of Asia. And when he did, he unraveled the knot with his sword and cut it. If you're confused on how he cut a knot with his sword, here's a little reenactment to see what he actually did. Hello, sir. I'd like to see the Gordian knot.
Oh, Alexander. I thought you would never arrive. You begin to think you weren't coming.
Well, I'm here. Tell your people that the cutter of the Gordian knot has arrived. Now, my friend, you know what I'm here for. Hand over the knot. So haste, young one. Just like in your youth. Come, let's get the knot. You know, he who unravels the knot will conquer all of Southwest Asia. It is a myth, but it may be true. Maybe you be the ruler of the world. Alexander, behold, the Gordian knot. Small, yet deadly. Nearly impossible to unravel. Notorious beast who may never get unraveled. But you are here now, Alexander. You may be the chosen one. You may unravel the knot. Take it. Fulfill your destiny. Become Alexander the Great.
Finally, I have the knot in my hands. Thank you, old man. Maybe I will be God's chosen. Now, I'm gonna unravel the knots using my amazing sword. Let's do this. By the might of my sword, the Gordian knot shall now be unraveled. Let's see if I am God's chosen.
Alexander did unravel the knot with his sword. After that made him more confident. He then moved on to Persia, which he did conquer. It was a hard battle, but he did it. Alexander became the all-ruling king of Persia, and would stay in Persia for most of his life. Alexander would then move on to conquer areas of Pakistan, Afghanistan, and then would move on to northwest India, where he would meet the end of his conquering spree. While in battle, his loyal companion, his horse Bucephalus, was always there to help him. But during a battle in India, Bucephalus was sadly killed, and Alexander was crippled. Alexander made it to the Punjab area of India, but once he got there, his conquering was basically unsuccessful. It pretty much went like this.
Okay, comrades. Take it all of Eastern Europe, all of West Asia, now. It's time to take all of India. Onward, you Safavids! Yeah!
Sadly for Alexander, the conquest of India failed. He made it as far as Punjab, but never got further. He retreated back to Persia, where he would live the rest of his life as the king of Persia. He would die in 323 BC of an unknown cause. Some said he died of poison. Others said he would die of being murdered. He was only 23 years old when he died.